Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's been a while since I've made a video. So, I have been working on a major project for probably about the last 6 months, and that project recently came to a conclusion. We moved a relatively massive data center, picked it all up in about 12 hours, and moved it over to a new location. This included multi-VDOM on the HQ Fortinet firewalls, 100 gigabit per second networking and the works. So it's been a challenging 6 months, but as this project is coming to a close, I'm starting to turn my sights on some of the products that Fortinet has released in the last 6 months that have really been interesting me. And trying to think, how do we apply those to the MSP space? I have a long history in managed services, and one of the things that I've really seen a lot in the threads and forums, communities, Facebook groups is MSPs wanting to know how to leverage security services to increase their revenue. And given the changes that Fortinet has made recently, the release of the 6.4 firmware, which for the record is not production ready, but it offers a bunch of new features that are really nice and integrate well with the cloud. And they've also released the NP7 chipset in some of their F model series firewalls. So the NP7 is not in all of the firewalls yet. It just got released. I think that the 4200F was announced this week. The 1800F has been I don't know if it's how long it's been out, but they announced it probably about a month or two ago, and that has the NP7 chip. And the NP7 chip is actually a really big step forward, and the F series in general is a big step forward from the E series. So I wanted to take some time and go over the general architecture and how MSPs can leverage the Fortinet platform to provide extra services, help companies become more secure in a scalable, automated, streamlined fashion that is capable for one engineer, essentially, possibly two or three, to ramp up from managing 10 or 20 firewalls to being able to manage hundreds and provide a high level of security services. So we're going to dive into this a little bit. When you are trying to implement a solution as an MSP, one, the solution and its components must be scalable. You cannot be running for 6 months and need to buy all new hardware. Virtualization in the cloud has come a long way in helping us with that. So they also must be geo-redundant. The cloud has introduced geo-redundancy. MSPs that are keeping services hosted at a single site are really missing out on the boat. You need to be able to set up geo-redundancy. And for those of you that have just a single location, the cloud is an easy way to scale up and create a copy of your architecture, and so that if anything ever happens to your ISP or whatever, you just have no impact to your customers. So it also must be able to support many customers. In my MSP days, when I was running a 1-2 person shop, we would have 50 to 100 customers, and you need to be able to support, whether you're starting off with 20, you need to be able to ramp up and get to that 50, 75, 100 mark pretty quickly and efficiently. You need to be thinking ahead. And then, as you hire staff, as you grow, as you try and teach newer level 1 techs, level 2 techs, how to implement these solutions, it needs to be easy to train your support staff. All right, so let's take a look at one of these firewalls. The 1800F series was released recently. This one's been out long enough to have an actual data sheet to support it. You can go to Fortinet.com, and if you go to their products, and you go to next generation firewalls, you're going to be able to scroll through here, as expected, these things, you can get a physical appliance or a virtual machine. I really am a big fan of the physical appliances for the firewalls. The ASICs and the chipsets in them, the VMs just cannot give you that. So if you go in here and you look at models and specs, this is going to be kind of the core of where you're going to get the information when you're actually engineering and looking to find the specific models and requirements for your organization. So let's say that you have an ISP that's 1 gigabit you have two ISPs and you have 1 gigabit each, but you have 40 gig network switches, or you have 100 gig network switches, or maybe you only have 10 gig network switches. This is going to be the spec sheet that's going to tell you what type of interfaces and what type of throughput you can get through a firewall, from VPN connections to sessions per second and full out threat protection. So there is an F series in every single one of these. So in the entry level, the 60F is going to be my go-to for client sites. In the mid-range, the 100F is really a good starting point if you're looking for like your HQ office setup. It's pretty beefy. It's got full-on threat protection at 1 gig per second. The 60F series has close to a gig threat protection. Now, the reason that I want to go with the F series is because the chipset advancement is pretty significant. Like a 60F is going to give you more horsepower than an 80E just because of that chipset difference. Now, not all these F series have NP7 chips, and if you look at the data sheet and you go down to where the physical ports and everything are, it'll tell you here SOC 4. SOC 4. So these lower end models are just going to go off the SOC chip. But when you get to the 1800F, or if you get into any of the higher models between them, what you'll see down here is this NP7 and CP9. Those are the chipsets that you're actually getting. And then it'll tell you what type of interfaces it has. So this one has 25 gigabit Ethernet and 40 gigabit Ethernet interfaces. And it has some copper interfaces over here as well, and some standard SFPs. So you're going to decide, based on this list, what type of firewalls you're going to put at each location, and that can be variable. And another thing that I really, really like is the switches. Forti switches are really, really easy to manage VLANs, make changes, dynamically assign stuff, set up 802.1x, tied network access on both the wired and wireless level to identity. So take a second, go through these. If you're interested in some of the other ancillary services that I'll be talking about, the analyzer, the cloud firewalls, email gateways, etc., they're all in here. You can look up the data sheets for all these products. They're pretty amazing. And the more you know about them, really, the better you're going to be able to support the solution. So when you're setting up your security environment, the first thing you want to do is size your firewall. So you can look at those data sheets and figure out, what is going to work best for you. In general, I would say a 100F for your HQ office is probably going to be sufficient. That will support multiple WAN links from your internet service providers. It has 10 gig downstream, so you can hook up your Forti switches at 10 gig. You can hook up 10 gig directly to the servers, and that should give you a relatively fast network experience. Some people will say that you need 40s, and some people will say you need hundreds, but it's a little bit of conjecture. 10 gig is going to be absolutely perfect for an MSP starting off. And then you're going to want to set up a compute environment. So I'm a Windows fan. I love Hyper-V. I love Azure. I love Office 365. Active Directory is one of my favorite sources for identity. But these things can be replaced with other solutions. There's Linux directory services, there's AWS, you can use Proxmox, you can use VMware. There's a bunch of different versions for your compute environment. The core thing is that you're going to need a compute environment. You're going to need a place to be able to spin up VMs where you can scale them and fail them over between nodes so that you have redundancy. And then you're going to want to create a network for the security services virtual machines that you have. So you're going to want to splinter off your security services VLANs into some type of DMZ. And I would suggest it being separate from your other DMZ subnets if you have web services, or you provide public DNS, or maybe you provide email services or anything else. Keeping the Fortinet services in their own little bubble is going to be pretty important too. And then you're going to want to branch off your own network for that. And you may have IoT networks, you may have VoIP phone networks, you may have IP-based cameras, You may have IP-based access control systems, and it's possible that you might want to implement multiple LAN subnets for different types of workers. Maybe you want a marketing subnet, maybe you have a field operations team, or maybe you have an executive team or a sales team, and you want to create a VLAN for each of those. So you're going to want to branch off your office network. I would suggest putting them on separate physical switching infrastructure and access point infrastructure, and have it connect directly up to your firewall, and then have your data center downstream go to data center switches to your hypervisor, and that's your VM host farm. So this will give you the ability to be able to have your office and kind of set this up so that you are a customer of your own services. You should always try and use the services yourself. If you sell them, you should know what the customer experience is. Your sales team should know and be able to go out and explain with experience and with the know-how of how these solutions are going to impact your customers' businesses. So that you want to set up redundancy. For this example, I'm using Azure. So you want to set up a replica of your security services in Azure. You want to replicate any other sites that you want to be geo-redundant as well. I set up all of my customers in Office 365. So setting up a CASB from your HQ firewall for your Office 365 instance is in the cards as well. So that is you eating the Fortinet services and using them yourself. Set up identity-based access with the Fort Authenticator. When a person plugs in, if it's a marketing person, it doesn't matter if they move offices. It doesn't matter where they go. That network connection and the VLAN that they're going to get assigned is tied to their identity. So if they shift departments, you move them in an AD group, and all of a sudden they're on a new network, the firewall policies and everything related to that network and that staff level access are going to immediately translate, and you're not going to have to update all your firewall policies. You're not going to have to go in and nitpick or audit anything. You're going to know if you set it up correctly, and if you do it identity based and you set all that 802.1x functionality up on the switches, that you can just move them in AD and their security is going to remain consistent, and there's not going to be any gaps or holes. All right, so client build-outs. We've talked about how the data center, and you're branching off your office, and you want it to be similar to a client build out, but honestly, it is going to have its differences from a client build out. You're going to have dedicated redundant ISPs. You don't know that your customers are going to have that. You are going to have high speed network switching capacity. You don't know if your customers are going to pay for high end switches, so you need to have backup options as well. You're going to probably have generous wireless coverage throughout your office. And, maybe some of the clients that you have, they have spotty wireless in the corner of their office or this or that. So, you want them to have that level of functionality. You want them to mirror you as much as possible. But if you're familiar with the MSP world, at the end of the day, it all comes down to what they're willing to pay for. But one thing that is consistent with client sites is that generally they want a guest network. They want, vendors and other business associates to be able to come into the office and get on a wireless signal or plug into the jack in the corner and be able to get on the network. And you want that to be able to provide a guest service to them that does not interact with the production network that you've set up for them. We talked about staff level VLANs and stuff, so you're going to want to distinguish zones of security and enforce stronger measures on critical assets. So, for instance, if you're doing, if you have a network for a research and development team, and they're producing intellectual property for that business, you're probably going to want to set up a higher standard of security. You may want to enforce two-factor authentications before they get into their repos. Enforce some of the cloud functionality in Office 365 to secure documents as you put them in the cloud. Maybe you want to set up email encryption in Office 365. There's a range of things to do, but knowing that your frontline staff, your cashiers, you probably don't need to secure them as much as you do the executive team or the CFO or the accounting team, so on and so forth. So you're going to want to distinguish at each client site, or maybe you want to set up tiers specific for your entire portfolio, what those tiers of security enforcement are going to be. So defining those is pretty important. And then, at the end of the day, you want to connect the technology to the business goals. So there's a lot of technology in the solution that I suggest, and I'm going to jump off the slide here for just a minute. And I'm going to throw up a video that I created, kind of illustrating where these functions come in. So, at your HQ office, I ballparking 100F is pretty good. You're going to want to set everything up at your office in high availability. HA is really, really wonderful on the FortiGates, but it also works really, really well for the FortiAnalyzer, the FortiManager, the FortiAuthenticator, and even the FortiMail. So you are going to set up physically your switching and routing infrastructure, your firewall are going to be high availability with two nodes or more. It's possible to do more with the FortiGates. But I suggest at least 2 nodes so that you have physical redundancy at your site. And you also want dual redundancy for your internet connections so that you can set up SD-WAN on the firewall. And then your hypervisor, I would suggest at least 4 nodes on your hypervisor. You don't want to overload nodes. You want to be able to take them down and drain them and do maintenance on them. So 4-node hypervisor with some pretty good specs, at least moderate for compute, RAM, storage capacity, so on and so forth. I like making everything a VM. That's my personal preference. So LDAP servers, CA servers, all my Fortinet servers, Fortinet, the EMS console, analyzer, manager, authenticator, FortiMail, they're all VMs. And we replicate those to another site. Now, if you don't have another physical site, this example uses Azure. You can set up a virtual network with the FortiGate VM in Azure. Same way, set up high availability, sync between those 2 sites so that you have failover. If you're using Office 365, the Fortinet portfolio, and it's actually in the enterprise subscription of the firewalls, includes a CASB license. So roll out CASB to all your clients as well. Use it in the office. See the intelligence that it gives you, so that you know how to support your clients with that. You know how to set up the policies. You know how to set up the data loss prevention. The CASB is an API that works with Office 365. It also works with Dropbox, Google Drive. It has a fair amount of vendor support, and it integrates natively with the platform. So, you see over here in the top left, you've got your security services, your MSP HQ, all that stuff. Your office network is over there in the top right. And you notice a little icon on here. So I put FortiClient on everything because you want to feed endpoint intelligence directly into the security fabric. You're setting up a security fabric for you and your customers. And one of the things that's really awesome about the 6.4 firmware is that it finally supports the security fabric for multi-VDOM mode. If you have a big chassis, so let's say, this isn't 100F, it's 1800F. That's a lot of horsepower for one firewall. You could actually separate that into multiple firewalls. You could create a DMZ firewall. You could create a public-facing hosting services firewall. You could create an office firewall. You could create a private data center firewall. And you could have all of those in a single physical chassis. And with the 6.4 firmware, that will be supported in the security fabric. In the 6.2 and below, it isn't, but that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to. So, you go down here, FortiCloud Sandbox. For an MSP, an on-prem sandbox is ridiculously expensive. The security subscriptions include FortiCloud Sandbox, and I set everything up on FortiCloud Sandbox. The FortiGuard security services, are absolutely business critical. You do not want to have to keep up with these firewalls. You want to automate as much as possible. So I enforce that all of my customers maintain their subscriptions. We just keep everything licensed across the board. That way the team of wonderful researchers out in California, when they discover a new exploit, they can push it to all of my fleet of firewalls immediately. So, we're setting up a bunch of management servers over here. And we'll get to those in that slide where I explain how to connect the technology to the business solution. But one of the things that you'll notice here is that we're creating IPsec tunnels. So there's an IPsec tunnel to Azure. there's an IPsec tunnel to all of your customers. So all of the traffic that you are providing your customer back and forth should travel over the private network. Those IPsec tunnels are encrypting all of that traffic, so you're keeping everything safe. And one of the benefits of the FortiManager and what this little icon here represents is the overlay controller VPN. So you can set up, you can have 20 firewalls out there and go into your FortiManager and run a little wizard and have it create a full mesh network. You know, in an MSP model, you probably wouldn't want to create a full mesh network, but that's appropriate for certain customer sites. So if a customer has 6 or 7 sites, if you wanted to create a full mesh IPsec tunnel network, totally an option with the overlay VPN controller. Or, you know, for an MSP to your HQ from your clients, you're going to want to create a hub and spoke VPN connection. And the overlay controller makes that super duper simple, makes it very easy for a new tech to be able to go out there and add a new customer to the VPN mesh or the VPN hub and spoke model. So, you know, we talked about, you know, the HQ model, and I recommended 100F. Down at the client level, usually a 60F is going to be appropriate. You know, hopefully soon we'll start seeing some 80 models in the F series, maybe even a 30 model in the F series. For the majority of customers, at least in my experience, you know, you always get those somewhat large customers, those mid-sized customers, but really the bread and butter is your mom and pop small businesses. So a 60F should be able to get most of those customers going. If you have a small branch site with, you know, 5 people and all of the services are at the headquarters location, and you have a tunnel back to headquarters for all of their private company traffic, like maybe their LDAP server or maybe a file server or whatever. So they're not VPNing directly to the remote office, they're VPNing to headquarters, then you could probably get away with a 30F at that point. So it's really going to depend on the client. You know, if they're running maybe like 3 racks in a data center or something, maybe bump them up to 100F. If they're a massive data center and they're running like 700 servers, 1,000 servers, and they have like 500 staff members, you know, that's when you're going to start getting into the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 models. So that's where an 1800F might be appropriate. So that's the general architecture, and there's a lot of components in here. So we'll go through and I'll explain a few of them. So we're going to start up here at the top left, and that is the FortiManager. And the FortiManager is your bread and butter. That is your brains. This is your scalability. This is what's going to allow you to do the work of 5 people with 1 person. Templates, quick provisioning, reuse of objects, the ability to copy and paste is what gives you the scalability. So you're solving the scalability business goal with the FortiManager. With FortiAnalyzer, you're providing the intelligence. So how do you provide value to your customer? You can get an expensive SIEM, but bang for your buck in complexity, the FortiAnalyzer is going to give you pre-canned reports that are easy to deploy relatively quickly out of the box. The FortiAuthenticator is going to give you your 2-factor, so network level, VPN level, zone level 2-factor authentication and unification of identity. When a user passes between multiple firewalls, having their identity stay consistent between those firewalls, being able to enforce identity across multiple firewalls, and 2-factor that in the process is the FortiAuthenticator. FortiNAC is going to manage basically anything. I'm still kind of new to FortiNAC. It's a recent acquisition. They're working on integrating it, but it has a tremendous amount of profiles to be able to identify essentially anything that you connect to the network. And you can build rules that will put it in the correct network depending on its device type, whether it's a camera or anything else. If you want to use identity-based, it has SNMP access to all of your switches and can dynamically update VLANs on your switches, even if they're not Forti switches. If you're using Aristas or D-Links or Cisco's, it uses SNMP to be able to provide that control. FortiMail is going to be your mail filter because we get a lot of spam and we get a lot of viruses, and email is the #1 attack vector. So we want to be able to filter that mail, and we want it to send suspicious things to the sandbox, and we're going to use the FortiSandbox Cloud for that. The firewall is going to send suspicious stuff to the sandbox to provide behavior-based. behavior-based analysis of things before they actually go to the endpoint. SD-WAN is going to provide you the ability to load balance or fail over between internet service providers. It's also going to give you an aggregate interface so that if you ever change your ISP in the future, you don't have to update 500 firewall policies. You can just update the SD-WAN configuration, and all the firewall policies are pointing at the SD-WAN object. The FortiGate, that is your bread and butter cornerstone of the actual security protection, network level functions, and scanning of everything. It can do full proxy inspection. It can do deep packet inspection. It can do SSL offloading for your DMZ and your web servers. It can do load balancing. It can be a web access firewall. It can be a data center firewall. It can be an internal segmentation firewall. Depending on the model and the functionality that you actually implement, full IPv6 support, supports advanced routing protocols, a lot of software-defined networking in relation to fabric connectors. So if you have a network up in Azure, for instance, you can set up a fabric connector to that cloud instance. And if the networking ever changes, you don't have to update the firewall. It just kind of works. And then there's the FortiSwitch. So the FortiSwitch is probably one of the easiest switches to manage and deploy that I've ever seen. It is all managed through the FortiGate console, and if you have them tied into the FortiManager, you can manage it through the FortiManager. You can set up templates and quickly provision just like normal with the FortiManager. But if you're going in and changing VLANs or changing ports or anything on an individual firewall, you just go into the GUI, click it, and all of the VLANs that you have on the trunk interface, whether they're 2, 3 switches down, are going to be there, and it's just click, and all of a sudden you have a port on a different VLAN. The FortiClient is going to be your host level extension of the security fabric. So, there is no perimeter anymore. Clients go all over the place. They go everywhere. That's why we enforce host level protections and we enforce identity, because they're going to go to Starbucks and they're going to go to Lowe's and they're going to go to other businesses and try and sell them things. And you're not going to be able to control the internet or the perimeter that they're on at all times. So you need a host level extension of your security fabric to provide that for you. And then LDAP servers. Identity is a cornerstone of a security fabric, and you need to be able to enforce identity all the way across every step of the path, whether it's going to your data center, whether it's going to Azure, whether it's going to Office 365. Things don't generally hack stuff. People click stuff. People click stuff that they're not supposed to. People go to websites that they're not supposed to. And you want to be able to know who did what. You need to be able to go back through the logs and correlate network traffic with who did it. That's where your LDAP servers are going to come in very handy. And then your IPsec tunnels, because in passing all of your network traffic over private IP space just makes life so much easier. Routing, everything becomes a million times easier when you're using private IP space and you're just encrypting it. So it doesn't matter what path on the internet it actually takes to get from one firewall to the other. In your perspective, it's all going over private IP space. That path is encrypted and it's irrelevant. It's a black box. So the next thing I want to touch on is how do we train your staff? And we'll close on this. So Fortinet has what they call the Network Security Expert NSE Institute, and they have 8 levels of training. And the first 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3, are going to be primarily business and sales focused. It's going to teach you how the technology solves business problems and how do you overcome objectives and how do you get to a point where you can explain to a customer where the value is in the solution. Level 4 is going to give you your initial deep dive into the firewall. This is where it's going to get really technical, and it's all focused on the FortiGate. This is the foundation for infrastructure and the security functions of the firewall itself. NSE 5 is going to be management focused. This is where you're going to learn about the FortiManager, and you're going to learn about the FortiAnalyzer, and you're going to learn how to create the ecosystem and implement administrative domains. And then the level 6 is a specialty one. You actually have an exam on each of the different technology areas like Fortinac that's in the NSE 6, FortiMail, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to get, I believe, 4 of those to actually get your NSE 6 certification. And then level 7 is going to be where you learn a lot of the more advanced firewall functions, like advanced threat protection and the switching and 802.1x and things of that nature. And then level 8, that's the master class, right? That's where you kind of get to put all of the pieces of the puzzle, and you can build an actual solution no matter what the size is, what the technology is, all of the different things. You can troubleshoot it top to bottom. You can build it, design it, and deploy it. So I hope this has been informative for you. I think Fortinet is an amazing product line for the MSP space, and I look forward to a lot of the new advances that they're going to be coming out with this year. If you found this video informative, please like it. Subscribe to the channel if you're interested in seeing more videos. I'm going to be doing more technical deep dives on how to configure an environment similar to this. I won't be using actual 1800F firewalls, but I'll be using some of the lower end models to mock this setup up and going through the actual technical implementation of those things. So stay tuned and subscribe if you want to see more videos like that. If you found this video valuable, or if you think your MSP friends might find it valuable, feel free to share it. Thank you.